Last time we spoke about the battle for the Great Wall of China. In 1933, the Kwantung Army faced logistical struggles and sought political deals with Chinese warlords to seize North China. Despite capturing key areas, chaos reigned as their unauthorized operations defied Tokyo's orders. When Emperor Hirohito demanded a withdrawal, the army reluctantly complied, derailing a coup attempt. Though peace talks followed, distrust persisted, and rogue Japanese commanders plotted fresh new offensives. The Tangu Truce was anything but fair to the Chinese. The Japanese followed it up with continuous negotiations aimed at slicing up more and more out of China. By 1935, North China was practically annexed, if but all in official terms. The Japanese seized postal rights, train rights, airline rights, set up puppets to police the new demilitarized zone, and seemed never fully appeased. Yet they did not only have their eye on northern China. This episode is Incidents in North China, Operation Chahar. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on all major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I released a rather hilarious episode covering the wacky and wild world of Chinese World War II dramas. And over on Echoes of War, we are now hitting our 5-part series covering the Malaysian campaign of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. May of 1935 marked the peak of the Sino-Japanese efforts at reconciliation. Yet this quickly fell apart in June as the Kwantung Army continued to encroach in North China. More specifically, they began to look at Chahar province. Between January and May of 1935, some 50 instances of anti-Japanese violence had broken out in North China. And behind these outbursts seemed to be Yu Shucheng, the chairman of Hubei's provincial government. He was not alone in his efforts, as many KMT members, generals in the Central Army, and the Blue Shirt Society for that matter, were also helping hands to play. The Japanese were particularly infuriated by incessant attacks from the bandit army led by Sun Yuan and the assassinations of 2 pro-Japanese figures operating in Tianjin, named Pai Yuhuan and Hu Enpu. Even with the support of the Kwantung Army, maintaining law and order in the demilitarized region established by the Tangu Truce proved a serious undertaking. The Nanjing government tried to exploit the situation, encouraging Sun Yuan's bandits to create chaos in the demilitarized region. Sun Yuan's bandits frequently crossed the Great Wall in Ruhe province during their raids, and each time they did so, the Kwantung Army attempted to catch them as they fled back into the demilitarized region. They particularly liked to do so in the Sunhua district, where the official Hu Xiaoyi supplied the bandits with munitions and provisions. On May the 17th, the Kwantung Army was fed up, and they elected to cross the Great Wall to crush Sun Yuan once and for all. The Japanese army attaché at Beiping, Major Takahashi Tan, notified the Chinese authorities of this decision, claiming the Kwantung Army had the authority to do so under certain provisions within the Tangu Agreement. Beginning on May the 20th, the Sugihara Mixed Brigade began to hunt, and they claimed that they had uncovered evidence that Yu Shucheng had helped guide Sun Yuan's bandits away from their force. The Japanese also argued the bandits were operating in Manchuria and were calling themselves the Northeastern Patriotic Volunteers, allegedly led by General Hu Yingqin, the current chairman of the Beiping Branch Military Council. The bandits were said to have been completely crushed within 5 days by a single brigade. The Japanese also forced the resignation of Yu Shucheng, who refused to organize an anti-Chiang Kai-shek movement. Shortly before the operation was launched, 2 pro-Japanese newspaper publishers, secretly supported by the Japanese Special Service Agency, were assassinated in Tianjin. On May 2nd, Huan Pu of the Guochuan Pao National Rights was shot in bed at his Peiyang hotel room in the Japanese concession. That same night, Pa Yuhuan of Chenpa was murdered in his home. Consul General Kawagoe reported to Tokyo Huan Pu and Pa Yunhua were performing a mission through their newspapers to arouse anti-Chiang Kai-shek sentiment in North China. As stated by Kawagoe, Hu and Pa did not have a particularly close personal relationship, but they were regarded with extreme suspicion by the Chinese. Since they were assassinated on the same night, we immediately suspected there was some political intrigue behind these crimes. Japanese police looked into the matter and discovered the criminals had used a car bearing the plate number 1063, which was owned by Shen Chucheng, who was a resident of the Japanese concession. Many suspects were interrogated, and given what they were saying, the Japanese suspected the man behind the assassinations was General Yang He, the Peace Preservation Commissioner of Shanghai and an alleged member of the Blue Shirt Society. The Japanese also believed Yang He was hiding in the French concessions in Shanghai. In protest of this, the Japanese invoked the Boxer Protocol and the Tangu Truce. Again, the Japanese were making some demands. Number 1. The Sun incident and the assassinations of the pro-Japanese, pro-Manchukuo newspaper publishers violated the North China Tangu ceasefire agreement of May of 1933. The North China ceasefire agreement stipulated that China would not take any action disturbing the peace on either side of the line, from Lutai to Baoti and Tongzhou. The above provisions extend to all of China and should of course be applied to any defiant deeds of the Chinese, officials that threaten the peace of the Beiping-Tianjin region. The Sun incident and the assassinations of Pai and He are clearly contrary to the above agreement. Number 2. The official note exchanged by China and Japan upon the return of Tianjin in 1902 is applicable to the murder of Pa Yunhuan. This note stated, in the event of a Chinese national who is employed by a foreign army is accused of disobeying the law, the commander of the army that employs the said Chinese national, in order that the matter may be decided in the most suitable manner, has the option of punishing him personally or voluntarily delivering him to the appropriate Chinese authorities. Your government must agree to this arrangement. Since Pai has already stated was in the employ of the Japanese army, his murder is clearly a deed which violates the above note. Thus, the Japanese invoked the right that the commander of the Tianjin garrison had the authority to maintain security and try any criminals. Because the Japanese army claimed it had the authority to conduct investigations, trials, and deal punishment within 2 miles of the Beiping-Shanhaiguan railway line, it insisted to do so given the recent events. This actually distorted some of the specifics of the Tangu Treaty, thus the Japanese were on quite loose grounds. On May the 25th, Tokyo HQ was forewarned of the actions of the Kwantung Army, what might be undertaken in North China. So Tokyo sent Colonel Sakai Takashi, the Tianjin Army Chief of Staff, and military attaché Takahashi Tan, called upon Yu Chaoqi, the Secretary General of the Political Affairs Council, and General Hu Yingqin. In fact, Sakai backed this up with a threatening public statement. The execution of the anti-Manchukuo plots under the direction of Chinese authorities, assistance to the Chinese Patriotic Volunteer Forces, and various acts of terrorism directed against Japan are destructive of the ceasefire agreement. The headquarters for these crimes are in Tianjin and Beiping. Should this state of affairs continue, it will become necessary to incorporate the above 2 cities in the demilitarized zone. The murders of Hu and Pai are violations of the provisions of the Boxer Settlement and a challenge to Japan. If similar acts hereafter occur, Japan will, on the basis of its treaty rights, be forced to consider what action is necessary for the defense of its rights. Additionally, Sakai demanded the withdrawal of all KMT-aligned units, Blue Shirt Society members, the Political Training Corps of the Beiping Branch Military Council, and the 3rd Regiment Military Police from North China. He also wanted Yu Shicheng dismissed as chairman of Hubei. The next day, in a move to intimidate Yu Shicheng, the Tianjin Army deployed armored vehicles, artillery, and machine guns directly in front of his official residence. Imagine waking up to that. It seems now that the Japanese sought to incorporate all of Hubei into the new demilitarized region. Now, to make this happen, Sakai had independently put forward these demands, but they were recognized as an ultimatum from Japan, one from which, for now, had no deadline. Chiang Kai-shek, Wang Jingwei, Wang Fu, and Hu Yingqin conferred over the situation and chose to informally talk with the Japanese while they kept the press quiet on the matter. The Chinese took their time, So as to pressure them further, the Kwantung Army deployed an infantry battalion and one cavalry brigade at Shananguan, while the Kawaguchi detachment concentrated around Gubei-ko, and 2 Air Force squadrons were brought over to Jinzhou. The Tianjin Army readied 2 battalions at Tianjin and Tangshan, both prepared to advance to Beiping at a moment's notice. After sending numerous orders to escalate things, Tokyo HQ sent Colonel Kita Seiichi, the chief of its China desk, to demand the Kwantung Army not use any more force. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Navy, under the fear of Anglo-American intervention, avoided escalating the situation but kept the Third Fleet on full alert. Under immense pressure, the Chinese buckled. At 6 p.m. on June the 10th, Hu Yingqin orally advised Major Takahashi that Nanjing would issue a directive ordering the immediate withdrawal of local KMT organs from Hubei, that the 51st NRA Army would depart by rail from Hubei between June the 11th and 25th, that the end of the 25th NRA divisions of the Central Army would also depart Hubei, and that the KMT would issue a directive prohibiting anti-Japanese activities throughout China. It was an incredibly embarrassing act, and it would become known as the He and Mizzou Agreement. Under its provisions, the Japanese had expelled the Central Army from North China. Yu Shicheng's forces, all anti-Japanese organizations of any sort, and all anti-Japanese officials were removed. The Japanese had heavily capitalized on the assassinations in Tianjin. However, other incidents enabled our dear and old friend Dohara to cause further mayhem. Following the Tangu Truce, Song Chi-yuan's 29th Army, consisting of the 37th, 38th, and 132nd Divisions, had been deployed throughout Chahar Province, with its headquarters based at Kalgan. His troops understandably displayed a lot of anti-Japanese attitude and behaviors. Like a broken record, it was only a matter of time until an incident organically presented itself. Finger quotes when I said organically there. One of the first incidents to break out occurred in Changpei. According to the Japanese, so get your grains of salt ready, a group of 8, led by a staff officer, Kawaguchi Kiyotake of the Tianjin garrison and Ikeda Katsumi of the consulate at Kalgan, had planned an excursion in Inner Mongolia late October of 1934. After completing all the necessary paperwork and procedures, such as securing visas and giving advance notice to the Chinese officials in the areas they would voyage, the Japanese departed Kalgan for Tulun on October the 27th. Upon entering Changpei's south gate, they were suddenly stopped by troops under Song Chi-yuan's 132nd Division, alongside some peace preservation corpsmen. Their commanding officer punched Ikeda, as the rest of the party were threatened with Dao swords and rifles. After about 40 minutes, a Chinese security officer showed up to allow them all to pass through the south gate. The Japanese Foreign Ministry and Army were obviously outraged by this incident. The vice consul at Kalgan, Hashimoto Masayasu, complained to the chief of staff of the 132nd Division, and Major Takahashi at Beiping lodged an official complaint with Song Chi-yuan. On November the 25th, Song Chi-yuan ordered the general commanding the 132nd Division, one Chao Teng-yu, to apologize and dismiss the officer who had punched Ikeda. Song Chi-yuan then guaranteed safe travel for all Japanese throughout Chahar Province, without any inspection of their possessions, and he promised to withdraw his troops west of the Great Wall. All of this because a guy was punched. You can really get a sense the Chinese were walking on eggshells. Then in late 1934, a large contingent of Song Chi-yuan's cavalry had deployed to an area around Fengning in Ruhe Province. They were defending strategic positions and establishing large peace preservation corps there. The Kwantung Army repeatedly demanded they withdraw from the area, and the Chinese had made promises as to such by December the 31st. Rather than comply, the Chinese launched an offensive and captured 40 Manchukuo militiamen. Song Chi-yuan rewarded his men with a bounty of 300 silver yuan, and he ordered the arms of the enemy be handed to the district government of Kuyuan. On January the 17th, the Kwantung Army moved the Nagami detachment of the IJ 8th Division from Chengdu to launch a punitive expedition against Song Chi-yuan's forces in the Kuyuan area. On the 20th, the Beiping Branch Military Council informed the Kwantung Army that Song Chi-yuan was already withdrawing his men. Thus, the Nagami detachment, who had already advanced as far as Tatan, turned around for the Great Wall on the 22nd, when they were suddenly attacked by Song Chi-yuan's troops near Huangnitan. The Kwantung Army were outraged by what they were calling the first incident in western Ruhe. The so-called incident would be resolved on February the 2nd near Ta'an when Zhang Yuting, acting on behalf of the NRA's 37th Division, and Major General Tenny Hiseao, on behalf of the IJ 7th Division, agreed to the following terms. Number 1. In the future, China will strictly prohibit actions that antagonize the Japanese army and will neither move troops into Manchukuo nor adopt a threatening attitude towards Manchukuo. The Chinese will completely suspend their current spying activities, such as scouting the movements of the Kwantung Army. Number 2. If China violates the above pledges in the future, the Japanese army will act independently and firmly, but the responsibility will be borne by the Chinese. If the Chinese forces increase their military strength or contemplate strengthening their fortifications, the Japanese army will regard these moves as hostile acts. Number 3. China is to have the government of Kuyuan District return all arms confiscated from the Manchukuo militiamen and turn them over to the Japanese army at Nanwei-tsu by February the 7th. Number 4. The outcome of this conference will be jointly announced on February the 4th. In particular, the Chinese should be careful that in making their announcement they do not distort the contents of the agreement or engage in counter-propaganda. Believe it or not, there would be a second incident in Changpei. 4 members of the Japanese Special Service Agency based at Abga, some 40 miles northwest of Toulon, had come to the same south gate at around 4 p.m. on June the 5th, trying to travel to Kalgan. There they were detained by units of the 132nd Division, who refused to recognize their identification papers. They were apparently held without proper bedding or food, threatened with dao swords and bayonets. The Japanese claimed it was all done under orders from Sun Yuan's chief of staff, and that their officials were interrogated by the chief of military police at Changpei. On June the 11th, Lieutenant Colonel Matsui Genosuke, the head of the Japanese Special Service Agency at Kalgan, demanded an official apology from Sun Yuan, and for the men responsible to be punished and for further guarantees of safe travel. Matsui also insinuated that unless Sun Yuan severed ties to Nanjing and became pro-Japanese, he might suffer the same fate that had befallen Yu Shichang. Clearly, the Kwantung Army was looking to remove Sun Yuan's army from Chahar province. There were 2 major reasons for such a thing. 1, so they could better protect the northwestern flank of Manchukuo, and 2, to support Prince De, who was attempting a campaign to make Inner Mongolia independent from China. On June the 11th, the Kwantung Army directed the Mukden Special Servants Agency Chief of Staff, our old buddy, Tohara, currently in Beiping, to confer with the army attaché there and with the Tianjin garrison. It was expected of them to push for Sun Yuan's army to be withdrawn south of the Yellow River as rapidly as possible. Tokyo HQ, as always, was keeping a close eye on their troublesome Kwantung officers as he dispatched this notice to Tohara. Although we desire the evacuation of Sun Yuan's army from Chahar province, we disagree that we should, at this time, demand its withdrawal south of the Yellow River. Rather, its transfer to the Beiping-Hankow railway line would be advisable. On June the 13th, the General Staff advised the Kwantung Army that exact same message. The General Staff then ordered every detachment in North China to act discreetly if, quote, "If we shun excessive publicity at this time, we should, in view of the present situation, be able to achieve practical results without publicity." Since they were already getting their way in Hubei, Tokyo HQ did not want to risk rocking the boat in Chahar province concurrently. Then came a second Western Ruhe incident, according to the Chengdu Special Service Agency. On June the 11th, when a party led by senior official of Fengning, Hu Xiang, was about to enter the town of Tongchaozu, it was attacked by a rifle fire from Sun Yuan's troops stationed in Tushiko. The next day, on June the 12th, a member of the border police force in Xiaochang was also fired upon by the same troops of Sun Yuan in the vicinity of Xiaochang. On June the 17th, the Kwantung Army General Minamijiro met with the Tianjin Army Chief of Staff, Sake, and the Special Service Agency Chief at Kalgan, Matsue, for a full report on the incident. After reviewing it, Minami drafted a policy to guide the Kwantung Army going forward. The withdrawal of Sun Yuan's army will worsen the confusion in the Beiping-Tianjin region. This incident should be handled separately from the North China problem and should be negotiated locally with Sun Yuan. Our demands will be limited to the following. Number 1. Withdrawal of the troops invading Manchukuo, together with their advanced unit at Toulon. Number 2. Removal of the forces back to the Kalgan area. Number 3. An official apology by Sun Yuan. Number 4. Punishment of those directly responsible for the Changpei incident. And number 5. Prohibition of anti-Japanese actions in the future. The Chinese realized they needed to reach a quick settlement with the Kwantung Army. On the 18th, Hu Yingqin met with Consul General Sima over in Nanjing. Sima was presented with a set of harsh demands from the Kwantung Army, and that same day reported to the executive Yuan that he had decided to relieve Sun Yuan of his post as governor and the commander of the 29th Army. He then appointed as acting governor and political commissar of the civil affairs Qin Duchun, who would take the 132nd Division implicated in the Changpei incident south. The message was relayed to the Japanese military attaché in Nanjing, Lieutenant Colonel Amiya Tsatsumi. The man who relayed the message was Vice Foreign Minister Tang Yujun, who also stated, "In view of the fact that China has moved voluntarily to dismiss Sun Yuan, to transfer his army, and to punish those responsible, we request that we not be confronted with an ultimatum in the form of various demands from the Kwantung Army, with a deadline for reply." On June the 19th, Nanjing officially implemented the promises made by Hu Yingqin and Tang Yujun. In turn, the Kwantung Army wired to Hara in Beiping to stand down and to wait to see if the Chinese did what they said they would do. Tohara was probably disappointed he could not perform his 100th false flag operation he must have been cooking up. Random side note, for those of you who watch my YouTube content, I use a lot of clips from the Chinese World War II drama series The Young Marshal that depicts Tohara rather hilariously. You can go check out my long-form documentary on the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. It's a lot of meme gold on Tohara clips. It's always him freaking out and smashing phones and such. It's pretty funny stuff. Anyways, at 10 p.m. on June the 23rd, Tohara alongside Matsue and Takahashi visited Qin Duchun at his residence to negotiate a final understanding. There, Tohara demanded China implement several measures to promote better relations with Japan, such as withdrawing Sun Yuan's army southwest, to give an apology for the Changpei incident, punish all those responsible, dissolve the anti-Japanese organizations in the region, ban Chinese immigration into Inner Mongolia, cease any oppressive actions against Mongolians, and cooperate and encourage trade between Manchukuo, Inner Mongolia, and North China. He also wanted them to appoint more Japanese military and political advisors. It was just a laundry list that he had kind of worked up. So Qin Duchun apologized for the Changpei incident, stated that they were already withdrawing Sun Yuan's men, and they were dissolving all the anti-Japanese organizations. Now, he was orally kind of agreeing to all of this, but he refused to put it in writing, prior to receiving a green light from Nanjing. Tohara understood and gave him time to talk to his government. The next day, however, another incident occurred, this time near Tushuko. There, a contingent of Sun Yuan's withdrawing troops fired upon Manchukuo police forces, and in response, the Tolun Special Service Agency dispatched a Mongolian unit led by Li Shuxin. It was not really much of an incident, just a minor confrontation, all things given. So the Kwantung Army told Tohara to deal with Qin Duchun in private about it. On June the 27th, Qin Duchun sent a formal reply to Tohara's demands in what became known as the Qin-Tohara Agreement. It conformed with all the demands, seeing Sun Yuan's troops depart southwest while the security of Chahar was entrusted to two separate peace preservation units. One unit was responsible for the Chinese population, the other over the Mongolians. On August 28th, Sun Yuan was appointed garrison commander over the Beiping-Tientsin region, with his 29th Division joining Qiao Tingyu's 132nd Division and Liu Zhongming's 2nd Division. Thus, after the He Emezu and Qin-Tohara agreements, the Japanese had now expanded their influence into both Hubei and Chahar province. 1935 saw a wave of incidents break out in the demilitarized region, prompting the Japanese to go into numerous negotiations with the Chinese to clamp down on anything they simply didn't like. Then on October the 4th, Japan unleashed a document titled Concerning Policy Towards China. The goal of our foreign policy is the development of East Asia and the maintenance of the security of East Asia through the cooperative concert of Japan, Manchukuo, and China, with Japan as the nucleus. This is likewise the objective of our policy towards China. To realize this objective on the basis of the outline below, the central and regional authorities of China must, by fair and just means, adjust their relations with Japan and Manchukuo so as to bring about an environment favorable to the establishment of basic relations between Japan, Manchukuo, and China. Number 1. China should adopt a good neighbor policy towards Japan, thoroughly suppress anti-Japanese activities, and abandon its policy of reliance on Europe and the United States. It should put all of this policy into practice, and as a matter of course, cooperate with Imperial Japan on practical problems. Number 2. Although China must eventually extend formal recognition to Manchukuo, Until then, it must recognize de facto the independence of Manchukuo and abandon its anti-Manchukuo policy. At least in North China, which borders on Manchukuo, the Chinese should promote economic and cultural cooperation with Manchukuo. Number 3. In view of the communist threat emanating from Outer Mongolia and posing a common menace to Japan, Manchukuo, and China, China should cooperate in measures aimed at eliminating the menace from the region bordering Outer Mongolia. Number 4. When the above points have been put into effect, and we recognize the good faith of China concerning friendly cooperation with Japan and Manchukuo, we shall first conclude comprehensive agreements on friendly cooperative relations between China and Japan, and therefore draw up the agreement needed for regulating new relations between Japan, Manchukuo, and China. To this, Chiang Kai-shek replied he could not recognize Manchukuo, but that his government would do whatever it could to peacefully maintain economic activity between the people north and south of the Great Wall. He also stated no other country on earth was more concerned with the communist menace in Mongolia than China. All of this appeasement efforts had brought Wang Jingwei to his boiling point, and on August 8th he departed for Shanghai, as he and his entire cabinet resigned. Chiang Kai-shek personally came over and asked Wang Jingwei to withdraw his resignation, given he offered him further support, and Wang Jingwei relented. Then on the morning of November the 1st, after attending a meeting, Wang Jingwei was shot by a Chinese reporter for the Chongquan Press, a company notably associated with Chiang Kai-shek. Rumors spread the assassination attempt was inspired by anti-Japanese elements such as Generals Yang Qi and Tang Shengji. With Wang Jingwei in the hospital, Chiang Kai-shek was forced to take a larger role with the North China situation. Then Wang Jingwei departed for Europe seeking better medical care, and he wired his resignation on November the 29th. Thus, Chiang Kai-shek succeeded him as president of the Executive Yuan, and the coalition between him and Wang Jingwei had officially ended. With Chiang Kai-shek now the only funnel from which action could be directed, the Japanese sent Ambassador Ariyoshi to China to persuade Chiang Kai-shek to grant some form of autonomy for North China. By this point, autonomy for North China had become part of Japan's national policy. Chiang Kai-shek, in response to this growing threat, went to Taiyuan, the capital of Shanxi, to meet with Yan Xishan. There he proposed that if Yan Xishan should unite with the northern warlords, Chiang Kai-shek would appoint him chairman of the Political Affairs Council with added authority over finances and diplomacy. Chiang Kai-shek also urged him to come attend the 6th plenum of the Kuomintang Central Executive Committee, scheduled for November the 1st. At this time, Yan Xishan's Shanxi was struggling financially, so he reconciled with Chiang Kai-shek. To this effect, Chiang Kai-shek sent his Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Staff, Xing Pin, to tour the north, trying to persuade those like Sun Yuan and Han Fuzhi to not support the North China autonomy movement. The Japanese obviously interpreted these efforts to thwart the autonomy movement as an underlying cause of all the anti-Japanese incidents breaking out continuously. To this, the Nanjing government disclaimed no responsibility and insisted they were doing everything the Japanese had asked them. The Japanese began a massive campaign aimed at all the important leaders in North China. One man they managed to gain influence over was Yin Yukang, who was on November the 25th at Tongzhou, where he announced the inauguration of the East Hubei Anti-Communist Autonomous Council, claiming autonomy for the entire demilitarized region. Yin Yukang's council consisted of 9 members, whereupon he was the chairman, and he took charge of foreign relations and military affairs. As you can imagine, Nanjing immediately labeled him a traitor and ordered him arrested. Chiang Kai-shek then rapidly sent word to the Japanese, with an official response to their concerning policy towards China document. This is what he said. To satisfy the various demands from the Japanese side, there should first of all be established in Hubei province an autonomous political administration. Ultimately, this administration should be similar to that governing the southwestern region. Whether or not this administration should be extended to other regions will be determined after the results in Hubei have been ascertained. Number 1. Although the campaign to wipe out the communists is progressing, the communist bandits have fled towards Gansu. Since this raises the danger that the communists may spread into Inner Mongolia, the defense against the communists in North China should be conducted jointly. Number 2. Certain aspects of the new monetary system are not suited to North China, and appropriate modifications will be made in this respect. Number 3. Efforts are to be made to harmonize economic interchange amongst the people on both sides of the Great Wall. Number 4. To meet the special needs of the region, the local administration should be given authority to enable it to exercise suitable control over financial matters in North China. Number 5. Pending issues are to be settled locally in a rational manner. And number 6. The aim will be to employ talented people to carry out the above tasks and to establish an ideal government. Chiang Kai-shek then dispatched Hu Yingqin to rein in the situation at Beiping, but upon his arrival, he believed the situation was beyond his control. Hu Yingqin reported that it was his belief the only way for Nanjing to retain some degree of authority in the region was to create a new political organ to do so. Thus, on December the 11th, the nationalist government established the Hubei Chahar Political Council chaired by Sun Yuan. Sun Yuan declared the new council would assume all responsibility for administering Hubei and Chahar, and he promised, quote, "To respect the wishes of the people, endeavor in particular to relieve the economic distress of the region, to maintain the peace of East Asia on the basis of Sino-Japanese amity." Thus, within all of this madness, now 2 autonomous regimes coexisted in North China. The East Hubei Anti-Communist Autonomous Council would administer 22 prefectures, with the Hubei Chahar Political Council, who would administer Hubei, Chahar, Beiping, and Tianjin. As you might imagine, relations between these 2 councils was complex and ambiguous. The 22 prefectures the former administered were under the jurisdiction of the other. One was a Japanese puppet, the other was controlled by Nanjing, who refused to recognize the other. Japan immediately exploited their newfound chaotic gains in North China. In May of 1936, the 2,000 troops of the Tianjin garrison was now boosted to 5,600, led by General Tashiro Kanechiro. This was done under the guise it was to defend against communists and to protect Japanese citizens. The position of the commander of the Tianjin garrison was officially promoted to encompass full responsibility for the situation in North China, exactly the same as the Kwantung Army's role was in Manchukuo. Thus, both the Kwantung Army and what was henceforth called the China Garrison had clearly defined roles. One would be responsible for Manchukuo, the other over North China. Thus, Japan had neutralized Ruhe, Chahar, and Hubei, all of whom would fall directly under their influence. Was Japan settled yet? I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you give my personal channel a look? The Pacific War channel found over at YouTube and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released a rather hilarious episode looking into the wacky world of Chinese World War II dramas. And over on Echoes of War, we are releasing a 5-part series covering the entire Malayan campaign of World War II. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. It's not always through military means that nations can encroach upon other nations. Japan was showcasing how it could basically just bully away parts of China through threats alone, and it was working miracles. But how long could Chiang Kai-shek carry on like this? Would it be Japan or his own people that would hang him for losing China?